Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Thank you, Harry, for that intro. And salutations, Connecticut, salutations, New Haven, salutations to the world, because literacy in Connecticut is literacy in any town, USA. That's the way it goes. So I'm appreciative of the gift that Tom Ficklin has given us. He's given us an hour to discuss the issues that matter, and he's been doing this for us, for me at least, for about 3 years now, giving me a monthly show to talk with educators who don't normally get the long-term stuff. We get a line, a 30-second, a 15-second, a quote somewhere, but we don't get a discussion. So we're here today. So I'm going to start us off with Dr. Bailey. And because she's diligently sending me some questions and stuff, and I mean, this is I feel like I'm a doctoral student again. You know, she's feeding me. Did you read this? Did you see that, Jesse? Did you get that? You know, and I'm like, oh. And anyway, Dr. Bailey has asked the question that once students learn to read, they break that code. How do we build capacity to read, to learn, using methods that are scientific, systematic, and sustainable? So that's a question, because it's on I know our state wants to spend $100 million on this. They like those words, scientific, systemic, and they love that idea, sustainable. But I've happened, just personally, this is sustainable stuff. I've been here 27 years, and I don't know about that. But anyway, I'm sorry, Dr. Bailey.
No problem. So first, let me thank, Tom Ficklin for this opportunity to share our ideas. And as you previously stated, this is an appetizer. This is not the whole show. So I want to talk about moving beyond learning how to read, and then talking about teaching children to read to learn. And I want to use one aspect of the science of reading that everyone engages in and agrees with, and that's the read aloud process. But I want to talk about being effective and efficient with this process, because what we do currently know is that is not a structured process, but a process where we know scientifically that reading aloud to children informs their language and literacy, but we have not been systemic in that process. We'll just choose any literature to read without a rhyme or reason, and then it's often limited, with one, children not seeing themselves within these books. So if we look at the read aloud process, I want to talk about repurposing it, restructuring it, and recycling it, and bringing to scale as a fundamental aspect of the science of reading. So what do I mean? Teachers actually need targeted professional development in, one, identifying books that actually educate, equip, empower, esteem, and edify children. So if you're looking at a 90-minute literacy block and see one of the arguments that's consistently on the table is, we don't have enough time to do this. We don't have enough time to do this. We don't have enough time to do this. Reading is not a subject. It is a skill that occurs throughout all content areas. And I'm focusing in on elementary now, because elementary teachers have it the hardest. They've got to know standards for history. They have to know the standards for science. They have to know the standards for math. They have to know the standards for ELA. And that's a lot. So what my process does is it looks at the content areas, identifies read aloud texts that actually help inform you in those standards, and at the same time you can address your language and literacy skills. So I'll take science, for example. We know that there are 3 dimensions of the next generation science standards. There are science and engineering practices, there are disciplinary core ideas, and there are cross-cutting concepts. How do we effectively address reading and reinforcing vocabulary, comprehension, fluency, phonics, and phonemic awareness within a science class? We actually identify literature. For example, if you look at buzzing with questions, and I don't know if we've queued up that handout that I've sent. We look at buzzing with questions. We can learn about life science. We can learn about Charles Henry Turner, who was a pioneer entomologist who actually did the research around bees and identified that they could see color and that spiders were capable of thought. And so with doing this, we are reinforcing the tier 3 vocabulary around entomology. We are accessing the academic vocabulary. We are accessing those common words. And we are creating questions for students that get them understanding, 1, the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. And so that's my advocacy. We got $100 million. Let's get some targeted professional development for classroom teachers around identifying culturally and historically responsive literature that allows teachers to address, i.e., maybe the 4 core disciplines in social studies, your civics, your economics, your geography, your history. Let's get the science and engineering practices. Let's get the mathematical practices for science standards. It can be done, but they have to be trained. And so professional development has got to be foundational for educators, elementary educators at that. Because what I do is I specialize in the demystification of this work, the deconstructing of this work so that teachers can speak the language. That's my soundbite. I'm sticking to it.
We like it. Stick to it. Stick to it. Stick to it. Just before, I'm going to go to Rachel next, but before I go to you, to Rachel, this brought up something. Yesterday in Chamberlain Elementary School, we were doing Read Across America. And a Spanish teacher and I would read a book we play on, you know, like, oh, I need a Spanish teacher because I'm reading a bilingual book. So it's super Oscar. And really something interesting happened. We have a class that yes, we have Spanish speakers, newly arrived Spanish speakers. We had 1 second grader who the teacher thought couldn't read. And when we were reading Mr. Martinez, now my Spanish is pretty bad, but so Mr. Martinez had to help me out. When the Spanish text was going on, all of a sudden the kid started jumping up and putting his head in the book. And we're like, oh, what's this? And then he started reading. And then we're like, whoa, would you like to read that? And then we saw, and that's just, it's interesting, that kind of concept that he saw himself in that book through his language. We thought possibly we were focusing on very early literacy skills that he was way past. I mean, a picture book can be a pretty technical book. It's not simple. And if you can read that fluently and you can give me intonation, oh, sorry. Rachel, recently, you're like the hot person in Connecticut for literacy, you know? Tell us a little bit about your passion and what is your take on all this?
Oh man, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be with everybody that's on this show. I'm really excited to get to hear some ideas and learn from folks today. So my passion at the moment is this. And it's the conversation with folks about what we could be doing. Now, in the beginning of the question, Dr. Turner, there was this idea that the state wants things to be scientific and systematic. And I think at one point you said systemic, and I want to make a big correction there. The state would like for things to be systematic, but this current policy is not systemic. And that is why it is absolutely going to fail unless it's revised. So I'm going to say this one more time, or I'll say it a little bit.
The people in the back.
People, the commissioner is jumping. You might be. They might mute you at the Department of Education today. I don't know.
They've already tried. It's okay. I find other outlets. It's weird. I had a workshop canceled. So, and you know, oops, I still popped up somewhere. This is still Connecticut, it's still New England, it's still America, even if there are if there are sort of routines and practices that look and sound like they aren't anymore. I love the idea of returning to a central core practice that can be culturally relevant. It doesn't have to be, but it can be culturally relevant, and it also can be culturally sustaining for the culture of a classroom, like a read aloud. However, under the current policy, elementary school teachers are, for the most part, being asked to adopt a new curriculum where they do not choose the texts. Now, that may be because it's coming straight out of a basal, or it may be because it's coming out of a curriculum that is a lot more structured than we're used to. And with some exceptions, and I want to acknowledge that there are some exceptions, with some exceptions, many few teachers are going to have many fewer choices over the text they use and how they use them than they may have in the past. You know, in some places that's going to be great. It's sort of like the prosperity gospel, right? Like that, like if you send your money to these televangelists on TV, you're going to have health and wealth. Well, if you've never really managed your money before, budgeting to send something into that guy with big hair on the television might stabilize and lift your economic practices for the first time. And I think this is going to be true for districts where literacy was basically just chaotic and a free-for-all, and teachers were doing whatever they could. They didn't have support, they didn't have materials, they didn't have professional development in a sustained way. Anything from the state is going to stabilize and lift, but it's only going to lift so far. And in places where it absolutely was not chaos, it was thoughtful, it was purposeful, it was intentional. Being asked to turn on a dime and do something else is a really good way to ensure that all of the attention and the energy and the resources of all kinds go directly to companies and out of our schools. So professional development is coming from outside trainers, not developing inside capacity. And it's not really professional development, it's training on like, how do we use this tool? And the materials also are coming from outside. They have been curated and collected by somebody else. There are some options that still allow some educator choice, and I would urge folks that are still making this decision for their schools and districts, or parents and community members that have aligned to their school boards and their principals and superintendents, to lean or urge people to lean toward the options where there still is an opportunity to choose the texts that are used, because no matter how beautiful, no matter how well-intentioned, an international mega company is not going to know the students in the community that are sitting on the rug in every first grade classroom. And it matters what text you choose for them. It matters for what they're exposed to. It matters for them seeing themselves in the book, quite literally seeing themselves. I love that example. And read aloud is a really great place to start, because you know that you're on firm ground. So if the state is looking for research-based and scientifically based, read aloud is part of almost every approach to literacy instruction, but it's done differently in every approach. And what we know about it, I tried to do a lit review on read alouds. It was unwieldy and really difficult. The thing is, that read aloud doesn't do anything by itself. It's a vehicle for different kinds of interaction around text. And what we know is it's a sturdy enough vehicle to hold interactions that build vocabulary, to hold interactions that build community, hold interactions that build social and emotional learning. But the teachers have to use it to hold those interactions, which means they need to have some freedom. They need to have support. They need to have time and space to plan. And we have to believe that they can do that. And the more we send them messages that they don't know what they're doing, the more we make them sit through 52 hours of webinars, redefining what a phoneme is to people with a master's degree, the less they're going to be able to trust themselves that they've got something to give the students in front of them. That's my spiel. Thanks.
That's a good spiel. That's a good spiel. I feel like I'm in the house. I know the house is on fire. It's a great party. It's like the Ohio players. Fire. Yeah. Don't go there, Jesse. So, Christina, I'm going to come to you now, because Christina brings us, she's not only a faculty member, a special education faculty member, she brings us 27 years of experience of working with parents with behavioral difficulties. And that's that group that I'm not so certain the science people are following over there. So Christina, could you tell us your take? And that's Robert, because Robert's going to give us the like come to the holy water moment. I hope. Put the pressure on him. Okay, Christina, could you give us your take on this?
Yeah, I love what I've heard from our previous two speakers because they're spot on. One of my greatest concerns, just a little bit of background on me, I was a provisionally licensed teacher. So 30 years ago, I signed up to start a second career in education, special education, working with children with behavior disabilities. And one of the things that I do know now that's being done, and I'm not sure if this is part of the reasoning behind science of reading, but I know right now, and we all know that we are undergoing some serious issues in education where no one's signing up to do the job. We have more people leaving than we have coming. Right now, many of the teachers who are coming in right now are coming in the way I did, and that is a second career. And so what they're doing is they're taking on, they're moving to this teaching as a career. They're taking on that extra debt to learn the fundamentals of teaching, to learn how to reach the children. And when they get into the classroom, you give them a box. And so I agree with what Rachel's saying. You're giving them a box and you're essentially saying, thank you for going into debt. Thank you for stretching your life and making such grand sacrifices as an adult. But right now, we just want you to work from this box. What it's doing is also limiting all the things that teachers can do with a story. And to Dr. Bailey's point, there is so much you can do with a story, with literature, that you cannot do with that box. That box doesn't even help you address most of the reading standards that the state has. You can check maybe one box, maybe two boxes, I don't know. But you definitely can't take that book and do with it all that can be done. One of the things that I have specialized in is one, trying to create opportunities for students that I serve, students with behavior disabilities and those at risk for developing them. How can we use what teachers are doing in the classroom when they read a book, whether it's a poem, drama, it doesn't matter what it is, but when you read it, how can you use what you're reading to help those children who need social development, who need behavioral modifications? You can use the book for that as well. Dr. Bailey pointed out how you can use literature to help in so many different subject areas. There's a way that you can also use it to address student needs for character development. You can develop simultaneously their reading comprehension, their character development, their critical thinking skills. And when you adopt this boxed curriculum, you limit it. I call it call and response. To me, that's the extent of it. You don't really engage students in the joy of reading. You don't engage their imagination. You give them what I consider a stale piece of bread, a piece of bread that you call the curriculum, the reading program, and you keep giving them this stale piece of bread day after day after day. How much joy can any child find in education if I get up, get ready, I come in, and the extent of my instruction is call and response with the teacher? That's one of the reasons why teachers today are having so many issues with students with behavioral issues, because they're bored, they're frustrated, and they want more engagement from the classroom instruction. And so when you can't build an engaging lesson, one that really helps them with those social interactions, one that it teaches them how to think critically, then you're robbing them of what an education actually was designed to be.
You got it. You got it. Now we've got that. Now I've got to take us to some religion now, because this is the richest state in the nation. I'm from New Jersey. I was out in Arizona, and then I came to Connecticut some 27 years ago, and I came to the richest state in the union. And at that time, Robert was a younger man than he is now, and we were all following. And I remember the first time I heard Robert, it had to do with, I think it's Connecticut Voices for Children, and he was discussing the CJEF case. So we had an opportunity. Our Supreme Court had an opportunity to give every child in the state of Connecticut a high quality and equitable education. Robert, tell us what went wrong.
All right, so that was more than a decade ago. Thanks for the introduction, Jesse, and I'm glad to be here with everybody today. So the CJEF case, I think it started in 2004. Basically, the court and the judge looked at the data, looked at what was being provided in public schools in Connecticut, and said that according to their interpretation, public education was being provided, I'll say sufficiently, and well, the early ruling was really, really tough. It was along the lines of there are desks, there are teachers, there are classrooms. That's sufficient. I mean, it was really that bad. And said, really the issue, according to the court, was that the kids aren't doing well enough on the state assessments, the standardized tests. That back then it was the CMT, Connecticut Mastery Test. This was just before they sort of transitioned to Smarter Balance. And so that was sort of seen as the problem. Now we, fast forward a decade, and what we find from folks like Bruce Baker and his colleagues is that looking sort of at school finances, that Connecticut does have sort of moderate, adequate funding for schools, right? It is, like you said, it's one of the sort of wealthiest states in the country. However, it's the gaps in funding between districts that's sort of the red flag. So in other words, your Hartfords, your New Britons, your Bridgeports, those districts, although it might be better off than some other states, is not getting the sort of adequate funding it needs to meet the sort of goals that are set by the state, compared to the Avons, the Simsburys, the New Canaans, and all these other places. And so, and it's getting worse over the last decade. That sort of issue has gotten worse. And so, again, that's sort of the landscape. And now we fast forward to this point right now where we are, which is, a very big moment in all of our lives. We had the pandemic, COVID-19, and it's created massive stress on schools, homes, families, our economy, and so on and so forth. And we're having this other moment where, schools are sort of being taking a lot of the, let's say, the responsibility for sort of recovering for kids and families and learning in schools is sort of being put onto schools in a way that I think is sort of beyond, in many ways, beyond what schools can actually accomplish. And so that's part of the story, is like, okay, so now we're going to say, after this momentous event, we have to make sure, kids can read more and better, and so on and so forth. And I think that's important. Obviously, it's a core issue, a core goal of the school is the kids to learn and read and so on. But I'll leave it. I'll put out a last detail, and we can sort of sort it out a little bit more. Is so what is it? Well, a year or two ago, the state of Connecticut said that all districts need to have a particular curriculum that's related to science of reading, SOR. And given all this context that I just described, it was interesting because there's a lot of questions about why that requirement was made. Because if you look back, overall, on average, kids were actually doing better on reading in the state tests overall for the kids that were tested 4 or 5 years ago. Before, so on average, it was something like 50-60% of kids were meeting sort of the goal, so to speak, on English language arts in Connecticut, but they didn't use science of reading. So why did science of reading get pulled out as the sole solution to all of the sort of needs that schools had, when actually you can look back and see that kids were actually doing better overall on average? So again, it's sort of this question of like, we had this really big event, we have these sort of unequal sort of resources that schools might have, and then it's like, okay, schools, put this curriculum into play, and that's going to be the solution to everything. And I think that's sort of a question that I have, and I'm concerned because I'm not at the moment a teacher. I don't work with teachers at the moment, but you can see from our guests how it's going to be a lot tougher for teachers to actually have to do a new curriculum. Are we going to find new teachers? Are they going to leave? all these questions are sort of at play at the moment, and I'm really concerned that, yeah, we might have a bump, there might be some improvement for a minute, but then you lose people. You focus more on one curriculum, and what do you lose by doing that? So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over, and if we have any particular questions, I'd be happy to get more into it. But my concern is that we're not looking at the big picture here, and we've sort of picked this particular thing as the answer to everything. And yeah, we need to do better in reading. We all teaching reading and all of these aspects of it. But is this the way to do it, right? So that's what I would say. Is I'll leave it at that.
I just like to comment on what Robert said, Dr. Cotto said, because I think that this is the linchpin in why this has come about. And one of the things that we all know is that in order to provide an equitable outcomes for all children, there needs to be a certain amount of structure and systematic and sustainable processes. And that has been difficult to attain throughout all the districts in Connecticut, particularly those districts that are urban. As we've seen over and over again, we have a huge gap between those who are learning and those who are not. And it's been called everything from achievement, opportunity, receivement, all of those things. But what we have not systemically done is looked at those causes. And I think what we're all saying here is that there are people doing some awesome things out there. Why isn't the benchmark that these practices, curriculum represent the evidence and scientific ways to actually get children to learn versus you have to do this? And I think that's the difficulty in trying to harness all of this knowledge and to make sure and to monitor what is happening across districts. And I think that's our challenge here. How do we build capacity in educators to implement these scientific, evidence-based research practices that are inclusive of historical and culturally responsive practices so that children are learning?
Mm-hmm. So,
and I think that's the question that people want answered.
Yeah. And before we go there, let me just take us back to something. Connecticut is always the state of silver bullets. It's never the state of equity. It's never the state of fairness. Okay, and I know we want all the systemic stuff, but I might call it systemic racism. But I don't. Maybe I shouldn't, because maybe they'll get mad at me. But we had a silver bullet maybe a decade ago. You all remember RTI. It was glorious. It was good, and the children were going to get. It was going to be whole class modifications, small group modifications, 1-to-1, tier 3. I call it the gold Cadillac of intervention, 1-to-1. And then what did I find? Avon, Simsbury, Madison, they had no problems delivering all 3 of those tiers. But my priority school districts had no tier 3, no gold Cadillac. Or if they did, you had to fight for like 5 years. I have a child that's been waiting 7 years to be identified in our literacy center now from one of those districts over there, and a fight every day to do it. But they didn't have that tier 3. And all of a sudden they didn't really even have the tier 2.
Yeah, no.
And all of a sudden their literacy specialists became literacy coaches, and they weren't working with children anymore. And my special education teachers became tested. But anyway, coming back to this is important. It's important for us that, and I'm bringing that. So I'm the crazy guy, the activist that gets arrested, that walks 400 miles to DC to protest all this nonsense. And I do this because it's really simple. Equity matters, fairness matters. And if you really believe all children can learn, then you're going to give all our schools, all our teachers, and all our parents the resources they need over there. It's and it's not just Connecticut. This I could go. I mean, Connecticut's not that much different than Alabama, than Florida, than these old many places across the country. So I want to, because time starts going quickly, and I'm going to get you all on here, 1-to-1, tier 3 radio shows coming, people. All right, it's coming. But let us let's work. Let's talk about one solution. If we can, if I can't, because that court, Robert will tell you, the Supreme Court said this is not a court issue. This is a legislative issue. And
Yes.
I'm always asking, well, my friends in the Black and Latino caucus, where's that legislative solution? Governor, where's that legislative solution? I'm looking for that. But let's just something simple. Give us something simple. Christina, give us something simple. You've got something called hope or something.
Yes, the HOPE method. It's an evidence-based strategy that teachers and parents how to use literature. Um, and when I say literature, of course, a little children's book, you can use informative text, you can watch a television show together and use this method. The method HOPE is designed to help both teachers and parents grow students. Not just their reading comprehension, because we know they need that, but we need students to actually know that there are life lessons that can come out of these books. And so I know when I was growing up, one of the things that we had was Aesop's Fables. And we knew that when we read these, there was a life lesson that was going to come out of that. I don't know where we lost it, but we stopped using text to teach our children not just how to read and how to just sort of remember the content, but how do we use it to teach them how to think? And so the HOPE method is sort of, in some ways, it's the grandchild of Aesop's Fables, if you will, in that it's designed to help parents and teachers get back to a place where we use these texts to do more than help students pass a test. Studies on it show that it does help students develop reading comprehension. It helps them to improve their character. School-wide discipline issues have gone down. Office referrals have declined. Out-of-school suspensions are reduced because teachers are using a strategy to help students make better decisions when it comes to their behavior. And so it is, and it's also not just in studies show it doesn't just improve the climate of the school, but it also helps improve teachers' perceptions of their working conditions because it does focus on using what they're already doing. We're not going to give you one more thing to do, one more thing to do, one more thing to do. We're going to take this method and do something that, when Jesse was talking about that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, one of the issues we've had in education is we have a piecemeal approach to everything. Everything is individualized and you just keep checking the boxes till you get to the end of the day. Well, the HOPE method is designed to say, look, we can simultaneously teach reading, we can teach critical thinking skills, we can address social emotional learning so that our students are being treated like a whole human being and not a widget. And so it's something that I'm very proud of. It's something that I actually developed because I needed something to work with my students with behavioral disabilities and those who are at risk of being identified as having a behavioral issue. I wanted to see how can we minimize the number of students who are identified as having behavior disabilities, and how can we do it in a way that teachers don't have to do another thing, because that's one of the complaints teachers have. You have me doing another thing. So how can we take what they're already doing to expand on the effectiveness of literature for children?
All right, perfect. We're going to come to you, Dr. Bailey. I'm going to remind people that we're going to get all this stuff in. We're going to come back and do individual shows. So we got to try to stay to like maybe 2 minutes in there and that stuff. But Dr. Bailey?
So first, before I give my spiel, I was remiss in not giving my background to our listening audience. So I am a 40-year retired educator. I've got 40 years in the Connecticut school district. I am a certified speech language pathologist, a certified special education teacher, a certified elementary teacher, a certified administrator.
Wow.
And so I come with the rank and file. And I'm going to give an example. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I was hired to become the director of literacy at a high school in Connecticut. I'll put the high school out there, Bloomfield High School. When I entered Bloomfield High School in 2013, Bloomfield High School was on the turnaround list. It was one of the lowest performing high schools in the state of Connecticut. I was hired as the director of literacy for high school. Now, you rarely hear about that at a high school.
Mm-hmm.
I had administrative power, which means I evaluated, I observed teachers, I gave feedback, I was a coach. I was not just a body in the building. And so literally, I looked at a systemic approach. First, I observed in all classrooms. I was over social studies in ELA and world languages, but I went into math and I went into science. And I did a survey of the types of questions teachers were asking and the text students were reading. And at the end of all of that and meeting closely with the administrative team, our focus was close reading and creating rigorous text-dependent questions across the school. The close process that Jesse referred to earlier, I created a process that became reflexive over time. So we talk about close reading, but we talk about it as something that we reflect on, but not that it's reflexive. So I taught teachers to teach their students to check for vocabulary, look for key ideas and details, observe book and text features, seek out signal words, and examine author's craft. That became one piece of information that they learned. And so, believe it or not, I also had to teach, well, what's a key idea in detail? Well, it's statistics, it's facts and figures, it's emotional examples. So they had to learn that. But what I saw that I've been seeing all of my life is that teachers are really hard pressed at how to explicitly teach children to figure out what words mean. So we had weekly professional development. We analyzed student work. I'm gonna bring this to a close. What happened after 3 years? Actually 2 years, 3 years. We sunsetted CAPT, and then we implemented Smarter Balance. And remember, it was 1 year that high school students took Smarter Balance before it was off the table. Mm-hmm. First, we did CAPT again. We administered CAPT, even though the states didn't have to do it. We administered CAPT. After 1 year, we had a 13% increase at goal in reading, and our writing score, I believe, was in the 80%. And then the next year, we were taking Smarter Balance. Bloomfield Public School high school students got off the turnaround list. If you remember, we had a press conference at the school. We had one of the highest 11th grade scores of Smarter Balance in the state of Connecticut, and I did the disaggregation. We were the only school district in the entire state that had the lowest percentage of students reading at or above level 1. That was low, 6%. Only 6% of our 11th grade students were reading at level 1. We had 69% at levels 3 and 4. And you know that was high. We were up there with Simsbury. We were up there with Fairfield. We were up there with Avon. That happened because of targeted professional development, using evidence and research-based practices, monitoring what teachers were doing, and giving children authentic text. That worked
Right.
because Bloomfield enjoyed a rigorous, like we were famous. And I'm going to tell you, in all of that, we lost 5 teachers. And you know why we lost them? Because they got doctorate degrees, they got administrators, they are now principals, they are now directors, and the school was turned over, and we didn't replicate it after the fact for whatever reason. But it's doable when you really provide that targeted professional development that works. And it's the rest is history. It's done.
So
But you need the leadership.
We've been there before.
Yeah,
We've been there before.
You need the leadership. It has to be continuous. It has to be sustainable.
Right.
Okay.
It just has to be.
Rachel, we're going
Yeah.
to come to you, and I'm going to bring us back to Robert next, because Robert has to fix everything. He doesn't know.
I'm so glad he's here.
Come on, Rachel.
Thank goodness. All right, go Huskies. Yeah, I think what Dr. Bailey has been talking about or illustrating with the Bloomfield example is exactly what's wrong with the current legislation. If we want it to be systemic, then it has to build infrastructure for instruction.
There you go.
Infrastructure means professional development, leadership, and curriculum have to be coherent with each other. They've got to be aligned with each other. And so putting curriculum on top of a school's existing system just complicates things.
Right.
If they had nothing, they'll be glad to have anything. But if they had something, it just complicates things. And so if we want to revise the current policy in order to make it a viable policy for folks, then there has to be an emphasis on building capacity within buildings. And it's going to be different. Well, I appreciate so much how Dr. Bailey talks about targeted professional development, not PD, not giving the same thing to every single teacher in the state as if they don't know anything and need people to force feed it to them. It means that schools get to say, hey, what are our assets? Because even the lowest performing school with the most turnover, with the worst building, has some assets because it's a group of people.
Exactly.
Nobody's worth just ignoring and throwing away. And so if we take it seriously that we are teaching human people, that that schools exist inside of communities and for communities, then we can't give them all the same set of solutions. We've got to say, what are your assets that you can build on? Because if I build it's building a house on sandy land, like I can't say, hey, we're going to give you a new assessment system because you know what your biggest weakness is? Assessment. I've got to say, where is your biggest strength and how do I build on that? Which means schools are going to have different pathways to the same outcome, and that's got to be okay. But that's only okay if they are supported in doing that. Leaders need support to do that kind of leadership, especially if it's new to them. And teachers need to support to do that kind of instruction that is responsive to the kids in front of them, because that will always be new for them. Not the act of responsiveness, but the group of kids, the context. Nobody had taught in a pandemic until we all had taught in a pandemic. And so it's not that, people who've been teaching 1 year or 30 years are not the same. They don't have the same needs. They don't have the same background knowledge to build on. And so considering targeting professional development at the school level, but really also the within school level, and making sure people have what they need to take on new ideas if what they're doing isn't working, or to refine existing ideas if what they're doing is almost working. And I think that's another thing that's been really discouraging to educators in Connecticut, is that the solution the state has put forth is really just drop what you're doing and do this thing instead.
Right.
Which suggests to them that even if they had whatever proficiency level they had, whether it was 90% or 20%, that everybody essentially had 0 because they've got to just do something else instead of building on what you have in order to make it work.
So just before we go to Robert, I've spent 15 summers working with teachers in Jamaica, and they have a term for this. When you start talking solutions, they are the first ones to say, well, Dr. Turner, if what you're talking about is painting my whole class with one brush, that doesn't work. And so immediately that concept. Robert, it's a difficult task, but it's funny. I've never understood the school funding formula in Connecticut. It seems to be nobody likes it, nobody wants it. It seems to, I don't know, but is there a solution? What would equity look like? I mean, because all these people are talking today, not just about literacy, but these things that Dr. Bailey's talking about, Dr. Gabrielle, Dr. Christina, these require resources and funding. So what would equity look like, Robert? You have the big task. We throw the weight on his shoulders.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for everyone's comments. I think we need to talk about, support, both inside the school and outside the school. And, to get support inside the school, that means following an equitable resource formula for schools, right? So there is a formula that sort of looks at, how much can towns provide and how much can the state provide, and the state needs to provide, what the sort of, the calculations, that look at need and provide that support for schools. And because what it does is it makes the environment within schools, like, are these places that people want to work? Do they want to stay there? Do they have resources? Do they have sufficient class sizes? And it sort of goes on and on. And those sort of things we need to think about, like, fund the formula. And if it doesn't work well, then you sort of revise it and you fund it as needed. I think that's what people are, you look at the legislature right now, people are saying we need to fund what we said we were going to fund to support schools, like you said, in ways that are by need. So I think that's important, particularly because as Rachel had mentioned earlier, we're sort of pulling this thing out and saying, here, do this whole new thing here. And it's like people were teaching kids how to read and they were trying to improve, and to sort of put this on people's lap and say, do this whole brand new thing. It's that sort of like, you got to rethink that and how we're actually really supporting schools. And just the last point on that is, you have Hartford saying we're tens of $millions short to fund what we have. And now we have to do add this new thing. Bridgeport is saying we have to close 6 schools over the next 3 years. How does that, you got to look at the higher level and say, wait a minute, are we actually providing the resources needed to, like, not to keep doing what we're doing and improve as we need? So I would say that. And then last, I would say is, we, in terms of supporting schools, we're at a moment where we need to sort of look back and say, over the last couple of years, how families and students are struggling in the context of their environment, their home, and what they need, right? There's currently on the books, being discussed, should there be a better child tax credit so families can actually provide the resources for their kids at home, groceries and stuff like that. We're at a real dire point. We're talking about rent controls in the legislature. I'm not saying 100% support this stuff, but I'm saying we need to sort of also think, like, how are we supporting families and kids? Because we want them to come to school, being fulfilled and ready to learn as well. So anyway, that's the last thing I'll say about that, is like, we need to start thinking about the sort of that support also, because we're recovering from a once in a lifetime situation. So that's where I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to you.
That's good. I want to pay homage to a Black researcher. Her son, Michael Ficklin, is my friend. It's Dorothy Ficklin. Dorothy Ficklin, I've dedicated today's show to Dorothy. Dorothy is that whole to part the whole, that balanced literacy, which we're not supposed to talk about now. Dorothy Ficklin wrote books on phonics. Dorothy Ficklin reminded me, you follow the data, Jesse. You follow the data. And she said, well, you begin with an authentic text, as Dr. Bailey said, and that should tell you where you need to go. And then you should follow that. And then it's okay. It's okay to target phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, phonemic awareness. It's okay to target any of those things. And of course, then you have to come back to see if the child really can do this in context. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting back here, and I don't want to say I was in another place where someone talked to me about the science of reading. There's some good stuff in there, but she turned around and said, balanced literacy. And I said, do you understand you're insulting one of the premier Black researchers in literacy? And she never, and that was nothing about, it's just interesting to me. So I do dedicate the show to one of my sincere heroes, Dorothy Strickland, over there. There's nothing wrong with balanced literacy. I'm hearing that stuff over here. Nobody over here is saying, don't do phonics, don't do phonemic awareness, don't do this. We are saying you need to give children, and this is one other thing about Dorothy Strickland. She said, I'm a library girl. I grew up in the library, and the librarian targeted books to me every week, and I loved every week going to the library and reading those books. I needed reasons to read. So I think that's a little piece. I'm not certain Harry's going to be over there. We could go. I'll do real quickly. Christina, you really just have 15 seconds, over there to say something. Hello. And remember, you're all coming back.
Yes.
Okay. And one-on-one, because Rachel, you have too much to be saying to be limited you to a couple of minutes. Dr. Bailey, I need 3 shows. Okay, Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think what we're all basically talking about today was we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't even know if they use that saying anymore, but that's what we're doing. We have good things going on if you just talk to the educators. But the idea that we throw out what we have, whether it's working or not, and replace it with something that we don't know what's going to happen, I think that is an example of getting rid of everything with the hope that this one thing will work. And the saddest part is how many years are going to go by, how many students' needs are going to go unmet while we figure this out with something that we all just told you it's not going to work, but somebody is going to suffer because we got to figure it out ourselves.
Dr. Bailey, you might have the last 15 seconds. If you hear the music playing, you know what's going on.
Just want to say, let's recycle what we're doing with this time. Let's repurpose what's happening across all these content areas, and let's be strategic.
Rachel, your 15 seconds.
Ooh, we've got to trust our educators because they love our kids and they know them the best. And that means trusting them means investing in them and also listening to them, giving them the flexibility to do what needs to be done.
And Robert, you give us that last 15 seconds. Think about those 2 young boys growing up, going to school.
Yeah, I want them to have joy in schools. And when they read, they have joy and they want to go to school to read things that bring them joy. And I think that's for me, I hope that we can make that environment. I'll leave it there.
That I fell in love with reading because I had teachers who were inspirational readers of the text. And I worked diligently to be that kind of reader. I fell in love with books because of that stuff. So that read aloud little piece over there, it wasn't just what we read. It's what we read matters. Hey, thank you. And Dr. Bailey, I'm going to get you in April. So we're going to talk about that. Rachel,
Gotcha.
you're May.
I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM. Your